Hey, gang. We're going to get into the episode momentarily. I am interviewing my friend Kyle. She does not know I'm doing this ahead of the episode, so I do apologize in advance to kind of ambush you on this. But Kyle and I know one another through her brother, Brian, who we lost a little while ago. And I just wanted to acknowledge him because I've known him since the fourth grade. We met, he was in Mr. Bierbauer's class. I was in Mrs. Vogel's class. They did some kind of classroom partnerships. We were always kind of working with each class with the folks, you know, on either side of the wall, so to speak. And that's how I met Brian. And he was actually the first boy I ever had a crush on. I don't need to be sharing this information, but it's just like one of my favorite memories. Like he had, you guys, we're talking, you know, 90s. He had the perfect bowl cut. His hair was just this golden, shining, he had the best hair in the whole wide world. And he's always been the nicest, sweetest guy. And I just wanted to take a minute to recognize Brian because, you know, through him, I've developed a relationship with his sister, Kyle. They also have a younger brother and then his parents as well. And, you know, I just wanted to give him his flowers because he was so loved. And yeah, so just wanted to acknowledge that. But stay tuned for the episode with Kyle, and thank you for joining us. Gang, welcome to another episode of Try Not to Curse. Elizabeth Marvel with you here. And I am sitting down with my friend Kyle. As you guys know, I am like fascinated by things that I don't know anything about. So Kyle has a medical condition that, much like Fiona, much like Robin, who we spoke to in season 1, took a while to get diagnosed. And now, you know, she's got through that part of it. And now she's moved on to the next chapter of her life of living with what she's got going on. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So Kyle, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And again, we're going to talk about some other things too, because it's not like your medical condition is your personality. But we've known each other for a very long time. And I should say, if we sound a little muffled, we are wearing masks. Because again, this is it an autoimmune situation or?
It's genetic, but my immune system is compromised due to it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so what exactly do you have?
So I have the thing that caused me to be here with you that I shared is gastroparesis, but my gastroparesis, which means paralyzed stomach, that's actually caused by a genetic condition that I have called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And that is a connective tissue disorder in your body. Your body just doesn't produce the right, the connective tissue isn't strong enough to support like your organs or anything in your body. It kind of stretches out of place and it causes numerous problems. And one of them for me is the gastroparesis. So
it being a genetic disposition, it's not hereditary though. Like, does anyone else in your family have this?
Not
or
that we know
potentially
of.
Prone to it?
So not that we know of, but when you get a genetic analysis done, one of the things that they're able to tell you is if it was a random mutation or if you inherited it, and I inherited it, but we don't know from which parent.
That's so interesting.
So neither of my parents have symptoms the way that I do or anything that we could point to and say for sure it came from my dad's side or from my mom's side. But one of them has this and just is basically asymptomatic. And I just kind of got all the symptoms.
Well, is it something that could one day show up in one of them? Like something could trigger, like, you know, for example, my aunt passed away from colon cancer, but it was triggered by, she had Crohn's disease. So it was triggered by a Crohn's flare up. And that just kind of lit the candle and that was it. So is that something that possibly one of your parents could one day all of a sudden?
Yeah, so they both have different, so it impacts like your muscles, your joints, your heart. It can impact your GI tract. It can impact basically any organ. And so they could have symptoms show up. The problem is that it's expensive to get genetic testing.
Sure.
And when you're at their age, when you're at my age, it's hard to get tested unless you're planning to have a child. And then they're a little bit more flexible because you could do the selective embryo where they look to make sure that you're not passing on EDS if you don't want to be passing on EDS. And with certain cases, mine is not like this, but there are certain ones that are nearly always fatal.
Oh, wow.
So you would want to know that.
Yeah, sure.
But since I don't have that type, there's not a rush to find out which parent it is and treat them differently. I wish there was, because there are certain medications that like we won't use on me because we know that they have a side effect. So
Okay.
I wish there was a bit of a desire to learn which parent it was, but also because whichever side of the family it comes from, and anybody else, my aunts, uncles, cousins, anybody else has the potential for this gene
Yeah.
to be within their family as well.
Yeah.
So it would be really nice to be able to pass that information along.
Of course.
And I don't have that. So
Well, and that's really strange too, because like for again, in my own case, my grandmother has breast cancer. One of my aunts passed away from breast cancer. So it took me a while. Like initially they used to, you could start getting mammograms at 30, then they pushed it back to 40. So once I hit 30, I was asking them to get mammograms. They were like, no, you don't need it. You don't have a history. I'm like, well, I do have a history. It's on my mother's side. And it took me, I think I finally got my first mammogram at 35 because I said, my grandmother has breast cancer for the second time. My aunt passed away from it. They're, oh, okay. But it's like, why do we have to fight so hard?
yeah,
Like it's preventative medicine, right?
it really is.
And now, of course, I'm going to be 40 this year, and now I've got a letter saying, "Hey, come on in. We can't wait to see you for your mammogram." I'm like, you know what, guys, But and I'm also getting hereditary blood work done because again, one of the radio shows I listened to, someone had shared their journey where they got hereditary testing because that then opens the door. If they find something, then your insurance is more likely to allow you to get mammograms and ultrasounds frequently, again, for preventative. But it's like, well, I can't do one until I do the other.
Yes.
And you won't let me do the other. So what are people supposed to do?
It's a constant fight.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
But again, you would think in your case, we know for a fact that we have this. We know for a fact that it's genetic. So that should open the door and say, hey, now we can have these other members of the family get tested. But they're just saying, no, it's not happening. That's so frustrating.
And for me, I feel frustrated because if we had known this information earlier, we may have been able to catch some of the things. Like I may not have a feeding tube right now if we had known to be looking for these things. And you can be diagnosed as a child. In fact, most people are. That's like the most common age range to be diagnosed. And it happens because with the type that I have, because you're either dislocating your joints or subluxing them, which means they're just sort of slipping out of place.
Okay.
And I have that. So if you think back to like, I was a dancer and a runner and I was constantly injured. As soon as I would recover, I was immediately injured again with something else. Some other joint didn't function the way it was supposed to. But I didn't start getting active into sports or anything until I was already in high school, which is late. Typically, when you're diagnosing a genetic condition, they're like in elementary school.
Right.
And they're sort of constantly in the ER or, constantly getting hurt doing gym at school. And I was always one of those people who was like, okay, I'll stand over here in the corner and like throw the basketball when we have to and then pretend I don't exist. So like I never got injured because I wasn't doing anything.
So aside from those injuries, did you have I should say, can you remember back to like, your childhood and where maybe like, oh yeah, maybe that was an indicator or how long have you had the symptoms? Pretty much your whole life.
Yeah, my whole life. And so you're sort of more susceptible to illnesses. And I was like constantly sick with like stomach bugs and ear infections and like sinus infections. Like all of these things sort of go hand in hand. So if you have an idea to be looking for this, but since I'm the first person in my family to be diagnosed that we're aware of, nobody's looking for this. And they call people with genetic diseases like this, they call them zebras because in medical school, the doctors are always like, if you hear hoof prints, then or hoof sound. I don't know. I don't have the saying correct. But if you hear that, you're supposed to think of horses and not zebras because it's supposed to be the most common thing. Mm-hmm. But I'm not common. I have a rare genetic disease. Yeah. So if anybody had stopped and said like, this could fit the pattern of, whatever. But I didn't have any doctor stop to say that until I finally got a referral down to Yale in 2020. And I was diagnosed at the end of 2020.
And how old are you now?
42.
Jesus. So not until you're 39.
Yeah.
that you get a proper diagnosis,
Yeah.
and now everything starts to make sense, right?
Yes.
You're looking back in your life and you're like, okay,
Yes.
now we understand what was going on the whole time.
And then you have all of your doctors saying, okay, well, people who have this are at risk for this, so we need to have this test now. And so it's been the last, 3 years really heavy on testing, making sure like we're paying attention. You can get the type that I have, you can get aortic aneurysm or a dissection of your aorta, which is
wow.
the major blood vessel to your heart. So, we did like special MRI to make sure that I didn't have any evidence of that happening. And then you repeat that again in a few years. And I was fine, but I could have not been fine,
Yeah.
So it's interesting to like see the way it shifts for the doctors when you have a diagnosis, especially when it's genetic diagnosis. We've gone through all the work at Yale, and it takes like 8 weeks for them to analyze your tiny blood sample. And they come back with this like 4-sheet long piece of paper being like, here's everything that's wrong with you. Here's everything we looked for.
Yeah.
They basically just call it a spelling mistake. And so I have a teeny tiny spelling mistake that, wreaked havoc,
Yeah.
basically. So.
And so if you're diagnosed earlier, in childhood, are there like you said, maybe you wouldn't have a feeding tube now. So what are the preventative measures that they would put into place that early?
It's mostly protection. Like I'm not able to run and jump in sports anymore. Like I can't, we wouldn't be doing trampoline things and even just like in dance, there's a lot of leaping. Like you wouldn't be doing that. You want to do as much as you can to protect your joints. And some people that have EDS and different forms of it, like there's certain forms of EDS that only impact your eyes. Like that's really, vastly different than me, which connective tissue is literally everywhere in your body.
Yeah.
So everything can be impacted. So depending on the type that you have, which is where your spelling mistake is in your genetic code, depending on where that is, determines which type you have. And then there's different things that they can do. So for me, like I may not have been dancing, or I might have been doing like low key and, not doing a lot of leaping and jumping and bouncing. I probably would not have been running cross country. I might have been running for fun, but it would have probably been more like a jog and not like trying to race.
Sure. Yeah.
And, when I think back, like a lot of my injuries happened because I just kept trying to push through because like nobody else was injured like I was, and it's kind of disheartening when you are constantly injured and there's no reason why. And we weren't thinking illness at that time.
Of
we
course,
were just
yeah.
like, I'm just broken. Like, what's wrong with me?
Your
like,
bones are weak or whatever. Yeah.
Like, those cobblestones that are outside on Bank Street.
Yeah.
Like the number of times that I roll my ankles on that. And when I say that to people, they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, I literally cannot walk on them without twisting my ankle.
Oh, geez.
And that's just like apparently not normal, but I didn't know that.
Right.
But now I do. And I also know that with this type of EDS, it's very common to roll your ankles and sprain them basically routinely. So just silly things that you can look back and add up your whole life and be like, okay, all of this was a symptom, even just little things like constant headaches and constant fatigue, difficulties with eating, like things that you maybe have spent your whole life pushing off and just being like, that's not a symptom. Like, I'm just not eating well today. Like, that's not a symptom of anything. But it turns out it is a symptom, and it adds up over time and becomes, bigger than it was. So,
well, can we talk about that? So when you say difficulties eating, what did that look like for you? And what did that feel like?
So with gastroparesis, a hallmark is actually vomiting. Most people like put food in and it does not stay in at all.
Okay.
I don't have that symptom, which is fortunately or unfortunately, because if you don't have that symptom, then you have to live with the way that it feels inside of you until your stomach is finally able to empty it. So the biggest sort of downfall with gastroparesis is that your stomach stays full of whatever you put in there. You always feel full. I tell people I haven't been hungry since 2009.
Jesus.
Because it's the last time that I remember I was in the city with some friends and they were all like, we're starving, we've got to go eat. And so I say it's the last time I was hungry, but really it's the first time that I noticed that I wasn't hungry.
Okay.
Because I don't even know what that feels like anymore because it's been so long. I have no idea. If I were hungry right now, I wouldn't be able to tell you.
Yeah.
I get physical symptoms of like a a headache or like dizzy and lightheaded. And actually, usually my family has to say, when's the last time you had something to eat?
Sure. Yeah.
Because I don't notice it.
Yeah.
So at different points, like we've tried setting an alarm clock where it goes off every 2 hours and I eat like a quarter of a cup of something, because you can't eat too much because your brain is under the impression that your belly is full.
Right.
And half the time it actually is full because it hasn't emptied yet. So when you should be eating, you're not eating because you're not getting the cues. When you do eat, you feel sick. Some people get sick. I don't. But if you don't, you get, I still have this as a problem today. Like if you come and visit me sometimes like much later in the day towards the nighttime, like I look about 9 months pregnant because my whole abdomen swells. It gets really tight and distended.
Yeah.
I frequently wear maternity pants because if I wear regular jeans, I have to change them 3 or 4 times a day because I need the next size up constantly. So like that's a weird thing, but I thought about maternity jeans like 4 years ago and I was like, all right, let's give that a shot. And it turns out to be a perfect solution.
Whatever works. Yeah.
And I don't have to change my clothes 4 times a day, which is great. If I'm home, I'm probably just wearing PJs folded underneath my belly and then it doesn't matter. But that's like a big symptom for me, this like distension that happens in your belly. And part of that is because I don't vomit. So it stays stuck in me. So this is a weird thing. Listeners might be grossed out, but it's my life. So here it comes.
Yeah.
So I have this feeding tube now, and the type I have is called a GJ tube. G for gastric, and J is for jejunum, which is like the second part of your small intestine.
Okay.
It's right at the top of it. And all of my formula goes through the J portion into my small intestine. All of my medicines goes into there on purpose so that it can be digested and absorbed properly. Because if it goes to my stomach, it will just sit there and not move. And then your stomach acid slowly kills off everything that was beneficial. So anything you are eating by mouth or putting in through the G portion of the tube, it's just sitting there. And by the time you actually digest it, there's nothing of benefit left to what was there. So you're not actually getting any nutrients. So a lot of people lose weight. I didn't. My weight.
I mean, you've always been fairly small to begin with.
Yeah, I'm not overweight.
Yeah.
But a lot of people drop down to like the 90s and the 80s, and they're very, very thin.
Sure.
And I didn't. Gastroparesis can also go the other way completely. You can like balloon up to the 200s out of nowhere.
Oh, wow.
And that's just like the way that your body is dealing with not being able to digest, because literally just nothing moves. Whatever you put in, it just sits there churning constantly. Like I constantly feel like I'm seasick.
Wow. Okay.
Because it's just this slow motion of like rolling or like being on a boat, but like you're standing still, but your stomach is constantly, it's trying to digest. It just can't do it.
Yeah.
So I get the formula and all of my medicines now through the J, and I absorb them, and all of my nutrition markers are coming back within normal markers now because my body's actually taking in that food correctly. And the reason why you get a tube that has a G and a J is because you can do this thing called venting. You actually like hook up a small tube to the G portion, and you can drain off the contents of your stomach. So anything that I eat now that I'm unable to vomit, it comes out through the tube instead.
Okay. Well, so I was going to ask you if you can eat it all, if you're interested in eating it all, because that's kind of, that's a real change, right? It's just all of a sudden like just not having flavor and not, you know what I mean? Like you could still be craving something, but if you just can't eat, but you can still eat.
Yes. A lot of people with tubes still eat and are encouraged to do so.
Okay.
It's a really common like misconception, or just like people aren't aware. But a lot of people that have tubes are still eating by mouth, even if it's just for pleasure. And so there's actually a video online that's really funny, which is somebody who has a G tube and she loves orange juice in the mornings, but she can't digest anything. So she, instead of just having a tube that drains into the sink, she has a bag. But you can watch her drink her orange juice and it fills the bag right up.
Wow.
Because it just comes right back out the tube.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's just something like it's a thing. She likes the taste of it, so she's able to eat it. So they call it eating for pleasure. Just whatever you want to taste, basically you can eat. But basically anything I put in my mouth, I'm not getting a nutritional benefit from that.
Right.
but it's good for your brain to keep
Sure.
eating,
Yeah.
especially if there's a hope at some point that you might be able to come off of the tube feeds or lessen them. Like right now I'm being fed 24/7, including while I'm sitting here having this conversation. And overnight, like you're sleeping with this, you have to sleep 30 to 45 degrees propped up in bed because otherwise you could choke.
Okay.
So there's a lot of, not challenges, but differences.
Adjustments you've got to make. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely that come with it. But, there's benefits to having this too, because I'm able to do that venting my stomach now. And that's a way to relieve some symptoms for me. And I do that twice a day. But some people don't do that at all. And some people do that like within a half an hour after everything that they eat or at the time that they're eating.
Yeah.
Depends on the severity of you. In my case, they would like my body to try to digest and see what happens. So we give it about 4 hours before we do anything.
Well, and so you don't do it until you're kind of feeling uncomfortable, or?
Yeah, you can wait until you're uncomfortable, or I have a time.
Okay.
So I do it at least twice a day, and it has to be at least 4 hours after I've eaten because we want to give my body some time
to process.
The average person probably digests their food within about a half an hour to 45 minutes.
Okay.
At 4 hours, I'm probably going to be able to drain off more than 80% of what I ate is still in my stomach and is going to just come right back out.
Okay.
So the longer I wait, the less comes out. But it just sits there. So if you think about like how acidic your stomach is, when you put something in there and it just sits in that environment, for that to pass through causes other symptoms in your small intestine because it's now passing through like very acidic things. But also there's nothing left for your small intestine to absorb anymore because whatever was there has been sort of killed by all that acid in your stomach. So
well, and so you said it's at some point some people can potentially come off the feeding tube. What are the circumstances for that? It's just because of the medication's working, or there's another treatment they could try?
Yeah, so the ultimate goal would be to not need a tube feed, or to only maybe need like a boost of a tube feed overnight. Some people feed for like 6 hours just to kind of top off. Mm-hmm. So the ultimate goal would be that my body would learn to digest. I don't feel that that's likely, but I am hoping that eventually my body would be able to take in food orally and then just do like a boost overnight, or even 12 hours instead of 24. But right now all of my nutritional needs are met by the tube.
And how long ago did you get the tube?
So I got the first tube in April. I started with a nasogastric tube, which is a tube that goes down your nose and into your stomach. And that didn't work for me for a number of reasons. But first of all, because my stomach just doesn't do what it's supposed to do. So the end point of that tube was not in the right place for me. So the next tube we tried was a nasojejunal tube, which goes into the small intestine. And that proved that it was the right location for the end point of it.
Okay.
But some people live with nasal tubes for years. They don't want a surgical tube. They have no desire for it. They just have a little tube that comes out of their nose and tucks behind their ear or up into their hair. And you would see it just like taped to their face.
Right.
And
how long did you have that nasal tube for?
I didn't have it for very long. And the reason why is because some people, myself included, get horrific side effects from the tube in the throat.
Oh, okay.
So I felt like I had strep throat and like a double ear infection. My neck was so sore. I felt like lightning bolts every time I was like trying to swallow. I was in the ER and I was like, get this tube out of me. Like, I know it's doing what it needs to do. I know I need it.
Right.
But please get this out of me.
Yeah.
So my course was complicated because my doctor was on maternity leave. And because my weight is stable, it's hard for other doctors who don't know me to look at me and just say, yeah, she needs a feeding tube when I'm,
right,
a healthy weight, basically. Right. I look quite healthy, I think. So I had a bit of a harder time getting to the next step, which was to get the surgical tube. But I got the surgical tube December 28th. You're meant to come home about 24 hours later, and I was there for 6 days because I had a complication. But so I spent New Year's in the hospital with 2 roommates. We were all sleeping by 10. It was a blast. But since then, you get frequent sort of tube change. In the beginning, I had like a really heavy, very awkward tube that kind of pulls down on your skin. It's very like you have to tape it to yourself, and I have a adhesive allergy, so
Oh, geez.
to tape that to me was incredibly uncomfortable. I had like no skin left towards the end, so they have an option, which I have now, which is called a button, which is sort of just like about a 1 inch by a ½ inch little piece that sticks out of you. And if you're not feeding or emptying your stomach, you could just close the little valves on it and go about your day and no one would know. It's a little tiny button,
Right.
and that's it. So I actually had a temporary tube in between the two because there's one measurement that they can't take until they're inside. And that's how long the tube needs to be to fit into your stomach from the outside.
Okay.
So they measure that when they take that first tube out. So I ended up with a temporary tube because there's like 70 different sizes when you combine all the measurements that need to be taken. So they don't have them all in stock all at once. And
Sure.
just coincidentally, they did not have mine. So I had to go back like 2 weeks later to get this. But some people prefer to have, that's called the dangler. Some people prefer to have the dangler. I don't know why. I can't imagine. This feels so much, I just feel so much lighter and freer. I feel like a normal person. I could wear normal pants right now if I want to, like, and I feel like it's a lot smaller. There's no weight to it. And there's just extension tubing that attaches to it. So I have one part that's attached 24/7 for 7 days, and then you change it and get all new stuff. And then the part for the stomach, I just put that on twice a day and then immediately take it off.
Okay.
And it just hangs out on a tray in my house until I'm ready for it. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, let's talk supply chain for a minute because you mentioned them not having the tube that you needed at the time. A friend of mine has a fully dependent special needs son who has a feeding tube as well. And as we all know, when COVID hit and supply chain and all that kind of stuff, he could only take a specific type of formula, and formula was so short and such a shortage. It was a real challenge. Is it just one specific type of formula that you have to take as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
And because of the gastroparesis, the formula that I have to have is like already broken down.
Okay. Yep. That's what she's got. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, I tell people that it's like akin to when you put food in your mouth and you chew it and then swallow it versus like if what you're putting in is already the chewed version, which is disgusting. But people seem to understand what I mean. Like you're
broken
not
down. Yeah.
It's not a solid piece that's going in that your body has to take apart. What's coming into me is already a part. It's in. It's like elemental pieces.
And it's exactly what you need. Yeah.
Yeah. And so my body doesn't actually have to do any work with that formula once it gets in there, except say, oh, I recognize this. We're going to take this and use this. And if my body had to break down all of the components of the formula, then I would not be having as good of a success with the tube as I am.
Sure.
So yeah, there's a specific formula. It's available from 2 manufacturers, and that's it. So, there are shortages, definitely. And when there's a shortage, then, I will.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what happens, but I heard like horror stories during COVID times of people and formula. I mean, infants with regular baby formula too,
Right.
just like can't get anything. So,
Well, and again, that's so many people had such a hard time with like, oh, limit 2 for this and that. And it's like, well, this is why, because we're not talking about just babies. We're talking about people with special needs. We're talking about people with these conditions that are also dependent and reliant on these specific formulas. And it's just you don't think about that unless you've met someone with these conditions.
Right.
So again, that's kind of why I wanted to share your story as well, because I feel like just the more information we can get out there, the more understanding there will be amongst our fellow humans, and we can all kind of come to the same page. It's like, oh, okay, let's we've got to support each other, because it's it's not just one person. There's a couple different people that are relying on these things.
yeah.
So you said you don't need to, well, you're constantly being fed all the time, but you
Yes.
don't need it all the time?
No, I need it all the time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
The goal would be to get to a point where you don't need it all the time. But right now, so I have a goal, which would be, it's like, well, it equates to 4.5 bottles of that formula in a day. And right now I'm actually only able to take in 3. So I'm not even getting the full amount. And that's because my body just can't process like how much formula would have to go in at a time. My body really struggles for that. So we've kind of found a happy medium where I started gaining some weight. My nutrition markers came up and we said, let's hold it right there and see what we can do.
Okay.
And then we're also working, when you struggle with eating so much and you're seeing people, like well-meaning people will say like, you should stop eating dairy because like my cousin stopped eating dairy and she did, and like even doctors say that to you and they'll say like, well, I have a patient, she stopped eating dairy and this helped. So when you're desperate for things I really started to get desperate, I would say I graduated grad school in 2008. So I think around 2009, early 2010 is when I was like grasping at straws, trying to figure out like what the heck is wrong with me. And as you know, it took until 2020 to actually get an answer and until now to really start treating that.
Yeah.
So when you think about it, how many people I've seen, how many people have like, you shouldn't have dairy. You should stop soy because that can cause inflammation.
Right. You should go gluten-free.
Yes.
Yeah.
I am gluten-free. Yes. I am all the things. I have been grain-free for years. I have done everything that anybody suggested, medical or otherwise. I've read so many books because when no one knows what's wrong with you and no one finds it, they begin to tell you that you must just have anxiety or, you probably just need to go see a psychiatrist and they'll help you. They'll get you on the right medication. And I'm like, no, I have like a physical symptom. Something is wrong with me and I don't know what to do. So you start to believe whoever you can. And sometimes
and everything sounds like, because if it's in the ballpark of what you've got going on, you figure, okay, well, it's not going to hurt to try that because maybe that's it. Maybe that's the missing piece. Yeah. So again,
you have no food left, basically.
So again, high school, you were getting hurt, your joints were out of alignment, whatever you want to say. But prior to that, did you always have issues eating, or that didn't really come until later?
The eating part started actually the summer after I graduated high school, 99.
Okay.
And it hit like a ton of bricks.
Ooh.
And it's just like gone downhill since then.
Yeah. And
you sort of like slowly lose one food here and there. And I've always been a very picky eater. People in high school used to make fun of me. Like, I won't eat chicken if it arrives on a bone. Like, but my mom would like cut it off the bone for me and put it on a plate and I would eat it.
Yeah.
So people always used to make fun of me for that. Like, what are you going to do when you're an adult? And like, you don't have your mom to cut the chicken off the meat. I'm like, I'm not going to eat chicken on a bone.
Right.
Like, that's an easy answer.
There you go. Yeah.
Some of that is like a pickiness that I had, but also I wonder now, like, there are certain things where I'm like, no, I can't try that. I can't eat that right now. Like cauliflower. I used to be able to eat cauliflower all the time. And now just the idea of eating cauliflower causes me to get nauseous.
Oh, wow.
Which tells me that I've had symptoms from eating cauliflower and I have like a mental association to that.
Sure, yeah.
So I now wonder when you look back, like, was I just a picky eater as a kid? Like, chicken
or
on the bone.
Or did you have a reaction and it just like, turned you off?
Some things is like texture-wise or something like that. Like I feel like when you're a kid, you're like, I'm not eating bananas. They feel funny in my mouth or whatever, you know, like that's a weird texture for me. But like now I wonder whether some of the foods like that I didn't try, that I wouldn't try or, wouldn't continue to eat are, related to that because I have an awareness of that now as an adult. So, but, people have taken systematically so many foods away from me over so many years I got down to the point where when we made the decision to do the tube, I was literally only eating 5 foods. So, and I was drenching everything in like olive oil or coconut oil to like get enough calories to go through the day to make sure there was fat in my diet.
Sure.
But obviously like that's not healthy. Eating a few spoonfuls of ground chicken covered in coconut oil or like cooked in coconut oil to just get fat in it is like, okay, but like what nutritional value is actually coming from here?
Right.
So when you ran my lab works, they came back to show, before we finally got the surgical tube to show that I had malnutrition and adult failure to thrive, which is just like insurance codes to tell you that you really need a feeding tube.
Yeah.
So now we're slowly, today, I had rice checks for the first time in like 8 years.
How'd that go?
Fine so far, knock on wood. I was allowed to have 1/4 of a cup of dry rice checks. So it's just sort of like I've got 5 rice-based foods that I'm allowed to try over the next month. And then I report back to the nutrition team, how it's going. And, the goal would be that my body absorbs something from that. I mean, there's not a lot of nutrition in Rice Chex, but still, the idea is that slowly I can start getting my body to understand that it's okay to eat food and it's okay to try to digest it, and figure this out. But it's as much of a mental piece now, I think actually even than ever before, because I didn't know what was happening in the beginning. I just knew like all of these foods were making me sick. And like I would always be like, I'm burping up chocolate and I haven't had chocolate in 2 days. That's because it's sitting in my stomach because chocolate's really fatty. So it doesn't digest.
Okay.
So it's literally sitting in my stomach. So I would like burp and be like, that tasted like chocolate, which I haven't had, since the weekend. And then I'd be like, this makes no sense. Yeah. It makes perfect sense now. I like that. I know what's happening, but
So what was it that finally led your doctors to be like, I think this is what's going on? Because again, we're talking, 20 years of try this, try that, maybe, da-da-da. So what was it that they finally said, okay, clearly there's something more going on. There's something deeper going on. Let's try this first. And you know what I mean? That finally was just that light bulb moment for your doctors that were like, okay, this is what we're dealing with.
Yeah. So in August of 2020, I had literally not left the house at all since COVID started. And I call it an episode. It's happened repeatedly since then, where I get like GI symptoms, but also cardio symptoms. And we didn't know what that was. That was the first time it had ever hit. And I sort of reluctantly had to make the decision to go to the ER, which is the last place I wanted to be during COVID after having not left the house at all, not even once.
Yeah.
And I ended up, the episode lasted for 68 hours. I ended up at New Milford ER and was discharged from there and then went back to Charlotte Hungerford the next day. We could not get an answer. I went and saw a doctor the next day after that. And I ended up doing a telehealth with my doctor at Yale, my GI doctor there. And I had only met him once before, right before COVID started, I believe. And I really didn't find him to be helpful in the slightest, but I was desperate. And so I got a telehealth visit with him, and he called out sick at the last minute, and they subbed in an APRN. And when she came on, she was like, please explain what happened in the ER and everything. And I kind of gave her this laundry list of everything. And she was like, this is way above and beyond what I can do. I need to refer you to my colleague. And that's how I got to the best doctor I've ever had in my whole life. Oh, wow. Just like a total fluke of this doctor being sick. And I got to this amazing doctor who is my doctor today. And when she listened to all of those things, she said immediately, I wasn't even finished listing my list of stuff. And she was like, has anybody ever asked you about EDS? And I said, no, but I've been researching it for 5 years and I'm pretty sure I have it.
Wow.
Can you please test me?
Wow.
And then she was like, yeah, we're definitely going to be looking at that. So she finished listening to everything, kind of got an idea. There's 13 different types of EDS that have been identified already with a genetic analysis. And there's another one that they don't know the gene that causes it yet, but there's a lot of people that fit the criteria for that. So they're just sort of in a category called hypermobile EDS. They have the symptoms, but there's not a link to them yet. So they're still looking for more spelling mistakes, basically. So she put through those 13 different possible spelling mistakes equate to a bunch of different genes that you look for. And she actually had them do a cardiac workup as well because I was having an arrhythmia. And so when it came back, that's when it confirmed it. But she knew, just listening to the symptoms, she knew that it had to be this because just when you add up all of the different things, I mean, there's dozens of symptoms that I was telling her that had been happening over a decade. And just, it's hard. I spent 3 years, the better part of 3 years, basically bedridden. I barely worked. I did nothing. I lost a lot of weight during that time and then slowly started to build myself back up, got to a point where I went back to WestConn part-time as a student, got back to working part-time and really started to turn my life around. And now we just know that what happened in that time is that I just was in a better place with the gastroparesis and able to function a little bit better. to the point where I had enough energy to actually function.
Yeah.
And then, in 2020, I started again back on like a backwards slope instead. So I'm hoping with this feeding tube that I am, moving in the right direction again towards like having more energy and being able to get back to really living a life.
And so you're a teacher, right?
No. I've been a substitute teacher a lot.
Okay.
Yes. I work for a hospice, actually, just reviewing charts and stuff now, which is great because I can work from home.
Right.
In my PJs if I need to.
But so while this was going on, while you were finally properly getting diagnosed, where were you working? What kind of benefits did you have? I mean, was insurance? See, she's shaking her head, so no. I already know. So, okay.
So I have always had private insurance because I've never held a job that I was able to work enough hours to qualify for benefits with. Okay. So I pay an astronomical amount of money to have private Anthem insurance, and that is because somebody many years ago told me, like, I think you're heading towards chronic illness, and if you can afford to stay on a plan like Anthem, then you need to. And for many years, that looked like my parents and my brother paying my insurance for me because I wasn't able to do it.
Yeah.
I'm able to pay it right now, and that's not always going to be the case.
Yeah.
Because depending on how sick I am, that depends on how much I'm able to work.
Yeah.
So, I can't really. Right now, I'm in a decent place. I'm able to work. I'm actually working enough that I could qualify to get insurance through the place where I'm working. But I have a lot of hesitancy with that, and that's because
something can happen.
Yeah, and my ability to have insurance is then tied to my ability to work. And if I can't work, then I don't have insurance.
It's a vicious cycle.
So, and I can't afford to not have insurance.
Sure, absolutely.
As of March, I had spent over $115,000 in insurance.
Jesus.
So, when you think about like having to pay out of pocket for that or having to pay the COBRA to cover the cost if you've missed it, it's just, and I'm not consistently in a place just yet where I need to be applying for disability. But disability, I've met with the lawyers already. Like it takes over 2 years once you're approved. And if you have something that's very obvious that's wrong with you, even still, they can take their time.
Right.
But I have been advised that I will be rejected at least the first time, if not the second time, and that we will have to continue to do it, and that it could take upwards of a year to actually get approved because you can't see my illness.
Right.
Even though I have tons of documentation.
And you've got a feeding tube.
Yeah. But when I sit across from you, I look healthy.
Right.
So it's really hard for someone to be like, are you sure you're disabled when you look totally healthy?
Which is wild because there are so many people that are walking around that look just fine. Yes. And you don't know what they've got going on under it. Like what? That's ridiculous.
Exactly.
That's like what you're just supposed to have like lesions and open sores. Like I don't understand. Like my arm has to fall off in order for you to help me. So that's where I was going with the insurance question. So when you finally were diagnosed and they said, okay, these are the things that we how hard was it to get them on board with your when your doctors are saying, no, this is definitely what's going on, even just getting the testing approved?
No, it's still hard. They still are fighting battles routinely.
Yeah.
Now, for example, I take Zyrtec just for allergies, but also because one of the things that happens in people like me is that you're just like allergic to everything and you get hives all over the place.
Great.
So I actually take more Zyrtec than you're supposed to in a day. So they only cover the one dose, but I take a double dose minimum. So in order to get that covered, they have to go through like a prior authorization. They have to prove that I get it. Insurance can still say no. Like it took a whole big hassle. And because Zyrtec is available over the counter, they just want to tell me to go pay for my own Zyrtec over the counter.
What do you need us for? Yeah.
I've been doing for 20 years. Yeah. But now I need my medicine to go through the J-tube, which means it needs to be liquid or it needs to be able to be dissolved in liquid so that I can push it through the tube. So it becomes, a problem. The end result is that Anthem is now paying for my Zyrtec in the correct prescription, but, they have to fight for every little thing. And
which again is wild because you're paying privately. So you would think you would have more coverage. You would have more, you would get a little more often.
No, it's the opposite.
It's wild. That's wild to me. Like, hi, over $100,000 and you're still going to tell me no for an allergy medication? Like, get out of here.
Yeah, agreed. It's very frustrating. It's frustrating for my doctors. There's so many things, like there's still tests that my doctor wants me to have. And one of the safest ways to start a new medication in somebody like me is actually to have it done in the hospital where they can control the environment.
Sure.
And insurance routinely refuses to pay for the procedures because they want you to try the medicine. But the point is you want to try the medicine in a controlled environment under small doses so that you can say, okay, she begins having side effects from this medication when we give it at this point. So we need to now dose it only at this level. And then it's doing enough to help, but she's not getting side effects.
Yeah.
So they routinely say no to that sort of test, which would be helpful. So the end result is that ultimately, eventually, we decide to write the prescription to just get the medicine and try it at a small dose, only to find that they now don't want to cover the medicine because we don't have proof that the medicine is actually working and is needed. Well, why don't we have the proof? Because you won't cover the test.
Right, because you won't let me. Well, it's the same, like when you try to apply for a job. Well, you don't have an experience.
Yes.
Well, I can't get experience until you let me in the door.
Exactly.
Come on. This is what drives me crazy. And
It's
again,
a nightmare.
And again, this is why I want to have these conversations, because I just feel like there are so many people that, again, unless you go through it yourself or have someone close to you that's going through these things, you really just don't know. Like, you really have no idea what a struggle it is, what a hassle it is, how many times, how long you're on the phone, how many conversations, how many rejection letters you get. And it's like, all I'm trying to do is live. Like, it's nothing that I've done to myself. I can get on my soapbox here, but I go on and on about like birth control, about your period and just having access to menstruation products. It's like, we can't do a thing about this. This is something that I was born with. It hits whenever it hits. And then from there, we've got our period until we hit menopause.
Exactly.
Well, okay, that's not my fault. It's not your fault. It's, you know what I mean? It's the same thing. Like, this is something, like you said, it's genetic. You were born with it.
Yeah.
Didn't know it was coming down the line, and now we're dealing with it. Okay, that's great that we've got a diagnosis and we know how to manage it, but let me manage it.
Yes.
Lord.
It's so frustrating to spend
absolutely.
hours in doctor's offices to be told, like, this is exactly what you need. This is what we need to do.
And we can't do it.
We can't do it. And you get these calls back from them and they're fighting and they're trying. And
well, so how's your mental health with all of this? I mean, do you have, we talked about this a little bit with Jessica, with my nephew, Tyler, who's now 5. He's already got medical trauma from having so many doctor's appointments, so many tests, so many surgeries. Are you like, do you get anxious every time you have to go in now and every time you have to make a phone call? And
yes, I do to an extent. It's not terrible, but actually, like, so when I just got this button tube, it does something that my first tube didn't do. It actually sort of like, it has like a suction cup feeling. Mm-hmm. It pulls into my body and then all of a sudden it's like a slingshot and it lets go and it pops out.
Oh.
And I caught it on video a couple times and I was like, I don't know what's happening, but like, it's uncomfortable. It wakes me up if I'm sleeping.
Oh,
like,
geez.
It's uncomfortable what's happening. And I was so afraid to have to tell my doctor, even though it's the doctor I love at Yale, I was so afraid to have to show her that because I love this button tube. I feel so much freer with it. And just like, I'm able to just live my life with this. But I was worried that was meaning that something was wrong with me.
Yeah, your
like,
body was rejecting it.
My body's rejecting it. So I reluctantly showed her the video and her answer was, this is okay. This is normal. This is actually one of my medications. It's working really well. And that's the proof of it.
Good. Okay.
It's helping my small intestine to move the formula along.
Okay.
So it's actually really a good thing. And as your intestine, it makes sense when you think about it, as your intestine is like contracting, that tube is right there. It's grabbing that tube with it. And then it lets it go and it pops the tube free.
Yeah.
So one of my medications is to make my body do that because my body does not do that movement piece at all from my stomach and also into my small intestine either. So for me, that's a good thing. And she was like, this is great. But then all the nervousness hit. I wasn't really like necessarily nervous to tell her, but after I told her, even when she told me the answer, it was like this weight came down on me, like how much stress I was carrying in anticipation that she might say I have to go back to that heavy dangler that has to be taped to my skin that was causing me so many problems.
Yeah.
And, there are options which people probably don't know, there are options if you can no longer tolerate tube feeds. There's something called TPN, which goes through like a central line, which is like just a giant IV in your body. And so there are options, but it's less safe, significantly so, to feed your body through your bloodstream than it is through your digestive tract.
Sure, yeah.
So, you know, I know this. I have friends who have gone the feeding tube route to the TPN route. Some of them have worked their way back and are eating now, and some of them are in some combination of all three. So I think in the back of my head, just, you know, all these things, you know how many times you're told no. You know that the easiest answer for insurance is going to be, well, just go back to that dangler. And then you know that your skin was raw and you had to see a wound specialist. And like, you have all of this floating in your head just to bring a small, 20-second video to your doctor and say, I don't know what's happening to me, but this is what's happening to me. And even just that is hard to say because you don't know what's going to happen on the end.
Yeah, you put a lot of pressure on yourself.
It turned out to be fine, but like, you don't know that.
Right.
And then my doctor was like, I don't think I've ever seen you nervous before. You look nervous right now. Are you okay? And I was like, I'm really not.
Other damn tube.
Yeah, I was like, I'm really not. I need a minute. Like, and I wasn't expecting it. So
Sure.
I think it hits when you least expect it for me.
Yeah.
But
now, can I ask, are you going to therapy? Do you have someone to talk to about it?
I do have a therapist. I haven't seen her in years, but when I first was really starting to get sick and constantly being told, like, this is in your head, you should see a therapist. I went back to a therapist I've seen for years off and on, and I went back to her and I just said, I'm going to sit here. I'm going to tell you my whole story. At the end, I just want your honest opinion. Like, am I nuts? Or do I have a physical symptom that you're seeing? Like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
And she was wonderful. She was like, let's do 5 or 6 sessions so I can get a real feel for what's going on. Honestly, it took that long to get out everything that was wrong with me because I didn't have answers. I couldn't sit down and say, this is what I have. I had to say, here's the 80 symptoms I'm dealing with, literally. And I have no idea what any of them mean, and neither does anybody else, but they think I'm crazy. The number of times, like, my dad drove me to an appointment and the doctor would pull him out and say, there's nothing wrong with her. She needs to see a therapist. This is not a physical problem. This is a mental issue. She needs to go to therapy.
Well, and how did your dad take that? Like, because that's got to be
heartbreaking.
For a parent, all you want is your kid to be safe and healthy and happy. And, they always say have the life they didn't have. And for someone to look you dead in the eye and be like, your kid's nuts, like, but you've been with them this whole time. You've seen the physical toll.
Yes.
You've seen how they react to eating and or the broken bones and all. So like that, I'm sure your dad probably felt like he was nuts.
Yes.
Too, because it's like, he's like, no, I know there's something going on here, but everybody's telling me that we're both, just delusional.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
It was hard for both of my parents.
Yeah.
I mean, for my brothers as well to go through and to know like,
and there's nothing they can do. Just be supportive. Yeah.
Yeah. And like, at first, I think my one brother, Brian, was like constantly like, I think downplaying the severity of the symptoms that I had. And then I posted a picture on Facebook one day, and I was with a friend's baby. I was like really happy. I thought, I was like, I look great here. Like, this is good.
Yeah.
Like, this is an okay picture for me to post. No one's going to be like, what's wrong with her? And he actually called my mom and was like, Kyle is really sick. She looks really sick in this picture.
Oh, jeez.
Like, and it was funny because to me, I thought, I look great today.
Yeah.
Like, this is a healthy picture. And in that picture is the first picture that he was like, what is wrong with Kyle? Something's not right.
Yeah.
So Eric has always been, my other brother has always been a little bit more aware of it and recognized right from the beginning, like that something wasn't right, that I was going downhill.
Yeah.
But, after, my dad's driving me to these appointments because I can't drive myself, back then. I was not able to do that. That's why I'm, an adult having my parent bring me to an appointment because I couldn't get myself there any other way. So, we eventually went and saw the therapist. And at the end, she was like, I'll write you a letter if I have to. Like, something is wrong with you. You need to keep looking. And she was actually the one who said, you need to start finding a new team. And then you end up, which maybe you've heard this from other people with chronic illnesses, but you end up with doctors who will say that you're doctor shopping. Well, I am. And I am because you have to
be an advocate for yourself. Yes, absolutely.
I ended up with 2 arrhythmias that need a heart medication that I had to fight myself to go to a cardiologist to get that medication because my doctor kept saying, my primary at the time just kept saying, you're anxious. This is what happens when people are anxious. And I was like, no, like I know what anxiety feels like in me. This is different.
Yeah.
My heart is pounding out of my chest. Like it's going like 170. Like something is wrong. I feel like I should be in the emergency room.
Yeah.
And he would just say, no, that's anxiety. That's anxiety. And thankfully, my dad already sees a cardiologist and mentioned it. And he was like, have her come on in and I'll take a look. First thing he did is put on a monitor that you're supposed to wear for 30 days. And after 7 days, he called and was like, I know what's wrong with you. Come in, take it off. We don't need it.
Yeah.
I've got medicine. You won't have this problem anymore.
Wow.
And he's right.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's a frustrating thing, I think, when doctors refuse to even consider that you have a symptom or believe you when you say you do.
And it's hard because you're the expert, right? Like you had all this schooling, you've got all these degrees, you spent all this money, you've got the white coat. So you, if anything, I shouldn't be coming to you. You should be coming to me and saying, absolutely, this is what we've got. This is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to handle it. And instead you walk away feeling like you're nuts.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
And then you really are doctor shopping.
Yeah.
Because you have to.
You have to. You
have to find someone who will listen to you.
Well, and I say all the time, it's always, you know, people will say, I was just talking with someone yesterday about this and they were like, oh, yep, there's that one guy that's good at this. And then that one guy. And I said, but that's everywhere you go. Every job, every profession. It doesn't matter what the degree is. It doesn't matter what their title is. They could be the shittiest version of that profession. And so, you know what? It behooves us to say, no, I know my body. I know what's right. I know what's wrong. And I know for a fact that there's something going on here. And okay, you're not the one that's going to help me. Great. There are a bunch of other ones that and sometimes you have to reach out. You have to go to other states. You have to, like you said, do the telehealth just to have the conversation with someone who will actually listen to you and not dismiss everything you're saying. But damn, it sucks. And it takes so much time. And it takes so much of your energy and your mental health suffers. So I'm sorry that you've had to go through all I'm glad you finally, you quote unquote, have an answer, but you're still going to be going through some testing. They're still going to be looking into other things.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're still sort of always looking because, even though this fits most of what's happening, like there are other things that feel like unexplained. And maybe that means that, only this small subset of people with EDS have it, but there's so few of us that they don't realize that that's connected yet. Yeah. Or it's possible that you have EDS, but you also just have like an autoimmune disease or dysautonomia, which is just like dysfunction of your automatic nervous system. So, there's options of things that they're still looking to kind of piece together the answers that you need. And some people might say that it's not necessary to keep looking because like you've got a name, you know what's wrong with you. But when you think about things like needing to be put under to get a procedure done, it changes the way that they treat you because your breathing patterns might not be the same because things are not functioning quite well. The arrhythmias that I have, are not necessarily explained just yet. So you want to keep looking for these things, and you want a doctor who wants to keep looking for these things.
Absolutely.
Because you want to know you don't want to end up in a situation where you're, in anesthesia and they don't know how to bring you back out of it because they're not sure what they're looking at. You don't want to be in that sort of position. Ever.
Well, and at the end of the day, everybody's different. Yeah. Everybody is different. Everybody's going to react differently to things. And if a doctor doesn't recognize that, it's like, okay, well, then you're not the person I need to talk to because hello, like it's just, but like I said, this is why I wanted to sit down and have this conversation because I think it's so important again to not only to advocate for yourself, but to keep doing the research and to keep learning and to keep, and just again, to hear what your fellow man is going through and just have a little more understanding for the people that walk around amongst us. Yeah. So I do appreciate you coming on here. What's the future looking like for you? Again, you're saying you're feeling a little better about possibly working more and maybe getting on work insurance. That's my hope for you is that you can get on work insurance and stop paying those insane premiums for private insurance that isn't helping you anyway, jerks. But what is the future looking like for you now?
I mostly want to be able to have a work-life balance because right now it's mostly I work to make sure I can pay my insurance, and then I use that insurance to go to the doctors, and that's about it.
Yeah.
So when I say, like, I'm feeling myself getting healthier, like, you know, I want to be able, my brother and I are season ticket members to, like, soccer in New Jersey, Gotham FC. Like, we want to be able to go and enjoy those games together and, like, not have it take everything out of me to where I feel like I need to take the next day off, you know?
Yeah.
So for me, I think it's a matter of just, like, bringing back a little bit of that flexibility of
And some normalcy.
I could do this. I can make the choice to do this. I don't need to say, well, I have to work, so I can't do anything fun because I need to get this work done first.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
that balance is what I'm working towards, and introducing new foods.
Hey,
So-
that's all right.
or reintroducing them, I guess. Getting them back. So
That's awesome. Well, you guys, this was my friend Kyle. Thank you so much for being vulnerable, for sharing your story, for opening up to us, and hopefully you guys learned some things.
thank you for having me.
This was Try Not to Curse, and we will catch you next time.